A girl named Blake once sat with her father as he struck a match and reassured her not to fear it. Years passed. Blake grew into a young woman and left the dying world of Kepler 209. Because of climate change, pandemics, and war, Earth was uninhabitable, and the ruling elite escaped and resettled on Kepler 209. 2 generations later, the Ulysses project started to find out whether returning to Earth is possible. It was not successful. The Ulysses project launched a second attempt, Ulysses 2, hoping Earth had healed. But their descent ended in disaster. Their craft crashed into a deep flooded region, catching fire as it sank. Blake scrambled to help Tucker with his mask and escaped with him. They surfaced, gasping, in an empty wasteland. Blake found Holden unresponsive and turned her over, only to realize she was dead. Blake quickly injected herself with a stabilizing dose. She returned to the wreckage and found Tucker unconscious but still alive.
It's clean.
She woke him up and reassured him that the atmosphere was breathable and scanned him for radiation and neurological damage. None was found. When he asked about Holden, she simply said she was gone. Now he was in charge. Tucker then self-injected as well. With only 6 hours and 45 minutes before the tide came back, they decided to collect as much data as possible. Tucker, unable to move due to injuries, stayed behind and monitored Blake's progress remotely. Blake noticed bubbles and foam boiling up from the surface. Her scans revealed active biogeochemical processes.
Kosorata.
Clearly reproductive.
Then she spotted a creature, an insect-like organism. Tucker identified it as a Calicarata. Blake assumed it reproduced internally.
Run the biometer. That's an order.
Tucker reminded her they'd been radiation-free for 563 days, urging her to begin testing. She pricked her finger for a blood test. Red blood cells and hemoglobin were stable, but her white cell count was low. Still, the results came back negative. She pressed on while Tucker monitored rapid climate fluctuations. Blake came across a jellyfish-like species, Aurelia arida, and asked for its reproductive details. Tucker briefed her as she knelt down to collect a sample. The creature stung her before she could react. She alerted Tucker, who calmed her down. The weather worsened. Tucker advised her to return and fired a flare to guide her. She acknowledged but didn't. Tucker stood by the entrance, then sealed it, joking about how long she was taking, but something was wrong. He sensed movement outside. The ground shook. Blake's voice called out, but he didn't answer. Then something attacked him. Blake frantically runs back, only to find the base destroyed. Voices carried through her comms. She dropped to the ground, weapon ready, and spotted a few figures through her lens. Survivors. Before she could act, someone ambushed her from behind. She and Tucker were thrown into a flooded pit. Blake climbed up, begged for assistance, but was shoved back down. With nothing else to use, she tore her shirt and wrapped it around Tucker's wound. As she did, a rope was suddenly lowered. When she climbed up, the people above stared at her. The survivors dragged Blake to a wounded man named Oogklap. They wanted her to treat him. A woman named Narvik, who spoke some English, guided her to collect medical tools. Blake, attempting to transmit her collected data, was caught in the act. Back at Oogklap's side, she tried to administer an injection.
I said keep him still!
Narvik snatches the syringe. Blake asked for help to hold him down and completed the treatment. She hides some of her tools while a quiet child, Mila, watches closely. Later, Blake returned to Tucker.
They destroyed the pod.
She told him there were children among the survivors. Their pod was beyond repair, so contacting Kepler wasn't an option for now. She believed if she gained their trust, they might find Ulysses one.
base orders.
She'd seen a biometer and hoped that was the path forward. Tucker, weak and pale, said he'd lost too much blood. He urged her to continue the mission without him. He just tells her to find Ulysses 1. Then with his last breath, he spoke the mission's motto and died.
I'm gonna give you one.
In a memory, Blake's father handed her a small container holding matches and a photo of their family. He told her to light one every time the second moon passed Cygnus. He'd do the same wherever he was. He then reminds her everything they do is for the many. Back in the pit, Blake muttered the slogan to herself again and again. She discovered the match holder among her things, and as water surged into the hole, climbed upward, shouting for help. Oogclap comes to the rescue. He pulled her up and tied her inside their shelter for the night. From there, Blake watched the survivors, children included, huddled around a fire. Another memory surfaced. Her father once showed her a globe, explaining how Earth used to have rivers, forests, and breathable air. But humans ruined it, leaving behind only remote weather stations. If Earth were safe again, he'd bring her home. He had shown her a seedling, proof that hope still existed. Back in the present, Blake begged for water, but the survivors tossed her back into the hole. Children mocked her, playing with her red case, laughing as she pleaded for its return. Only Mela stayed behind. Curious, Mela asked where she came from. Blake sketches her home planet, Kepler 209. She told Mela that people stopped having children there, that's why they came back to Earth. The two shared names.
Mela.
Blake.
Then Blake asked Mela to find the real case, the one she had drawn. Mela nodded and left. While trapped, Blake saw an insect crawling inside the glass. Suddenly, voices echoed from above. The hatch opened. A man lowered a rope and dropped children into the pit. Crying and confused, 3 girls and a baby were sent down. The infant was tossed in. Blake caught the baby as the hatch slammed shut. Gunfire soon followed. Blake climbed to peek outside. Soldiers were raiding the shelter. They shouted at families and tore children from their arms. The child who had taken Blake's case was among those taken. Many parents were gunned down. A figure approached the pit. Blake froze. He peered in through the holes. She hid beneath the water with the babies until he left. When the coast was clear, they surfaced. The baby began to cry. Blake held him close, trying to keep him calm. Soon after, Narvik, wounded but alive, returned and dropped a rope into the pit. She called out for Mela, but found only her doll. She picked it up. Blake climbed out and followed. Narvik led Blake to a massive structure where she began cutting edible growths from it. Blake followed, thirsty, scanning for clean water. As they converse, Blake learns Mila is Narvik's daughter. Narvik offered her some food, then asked why she was following her. Blake said she just wanted to help. Suddenly a child's voice rang out, Mela. Near the shoreline, they saw unfamiliar boats arriving. Some of their people were preparing to leave. Among them was Mela. Narvik grew frantic and prepared to fire a flare. Blake tried to stop her, arguing it would be useless unless fired into the sky. Narvik refused. Blake wrestled the flare from her and shot it upward herself. Blake dashed to the boats, urgently searching for her red case. Just as she found it, several men appeared nearby. Realizing a group was being rounded up, she quietly slipped in among them to avoid drawing attention. Inside the cramped space were Oogclap and Mela. Oogclap noticed her shivering and handed her a cloth. Moments later, the boat started moving, only to stop shortly after. Another vessel pulled alongside, the door opened, and one by one, they were forced off. They were led into a large place. Everyone stood silently as a man named Paling entered. He was the one in charge of assigning labor. He paced through the group, inspecting faces. Without explanation, he selected a few and had them taken away. Mila was handed off to another girl who let her out. As they disappeared, Mila called out for Blake. Then Paling turned his attention to her, his eyes locked on the necklace she wore. He said nothing, but motioned for her to follow. Upstairs, he ordered her to remove her cape. She dropped it. He checked her pockets and escorted her into a narrow room. Inside, Blake met a young boy named Neil. His eyes lit up as he asked if she was an astronaut. A man named Gibson soon joined them. Gibson remembers her as a child.
We had a malfunction after entering the stratosphere.
He apologized for the harsh welcome and asked what had happened. Blake explained that their descent had gone wrong after entering the stratosphere. Gibson asked if they had managed to contact Kepler. She told him they hadn't. The survivors damaged their pod. She added they'd brought a biometer from Kepler, designed to detect biochemical shifts, particularly fertility markers. He asked if it could transmit. Blake said it needed a connection to Ulysses 1. Gibson then revealed Ulysses 1 had been destroyed. She asked about her father.
Shortly after sending our last status report.
He recounted what had happened. After Ulysses 1's last transmission, they had discovered Earth survivors whom they referred to as the Mud. Her father, it turned out, had been especially good with them. The crew had been preparing to send their final report home to trigger the return mission, but the Mud turned violent. They destroyed the outpost, including Ulysses 1, killing many, her father among them.
It's so dangerous here, we've been forced to arm ourselves.
In the chaos, they were forced to arm themselves with whatever weapons they could scavenge from abandoned ships.
We found weapons in one of the abandoned ships.
Gibson steered the conversation back to her origins. He wanted to know the current state of things. Blake didn't sugarcoat it. Things had only gotten worse. All reproductive technologies had failed.
How do we handle Kepler's arrival?
He said they needed to bring their people here and fulfill her father's dream. Their discussion turned toward logistics. They stepped onto a landing and looked down at a turbine below. A dam had already been built to hold back the sea, but Gibson said the rebellion had derailed almost everything.
Your father realized the tides might provide a source of
Hydroelectricity.
Gibson explained that her father had seen potential in the tides. The ceaseless push and pull of the ocean could generate electricity to build a future. Before Blake could respond, Paling arrived.
The shower works.
Gibson took her to a small cabin and told her the shower still worked, though the water might not be perfectly clear. He said goodnight and left her to rest. Alone, Blake finally allowed herself to cry. In a flashback, she held a match, speaking its element aloud. Her father had explained the wonder of fire, how it changed humanity forever. The match slipped from her hand, igniting the papers below. Back in the present, she showered. When she noticed blood between her legs, her expression changed. She paused, touched it, and a slow, knowing smile crept across her face. A knock came at the door. Paling had returned, leaving some folded clothes. Dressed and stepping out, Blake noticed a group of children seated like a class. Gibson waved her over and she joined them. The children all greeted her warmly. He asked them to show her what they had. Learned lessons they'd long prepared for visitors from Kepler. They stood and sang a song. As the song played, Mela wandered into the room. She looked puzzled, and even more so when she saw Blake. Afterward, the children eagerly asked questions about Kepler. When it ended, they thanked her, and Blake quietly left the room. Later, she found Neil sitting alone. She asked why he wasn't with the others. He said he had private lessons and was busy with schoolwork. Curious, he asked if she was good at math. She told him to test her.
What's 67 times 54?
Suddenly, Neil asked if she wanted to know a secret. He showed her a small container with a plant inside. She asked who taught him that. Neil answered, Christopher Columbus, a man who supposedly lived near the engine room and talked to him through the pipes. Puzzled, Blake asked to see him. Neil refused. Blake pulled a map off the wall and followed it toward the engine room. When she arrived, a man was there. Just as she approached, Gibson appeared. His expression had changed. He apologized.
Why is he in there?
Just give me a chance.
Just tell me why.
Blake asked why her father is there. Gibson tells her father had led the rebellion, the one he had blamed on the Muds. Gibson admitted her father had fallen in love with a Mud woman and lost sight of his original mission. She told him to open the door. Inside, her father stood. They embraced. She asked if what Gibson said is true. She told him she'd waited 15 years and fought for this mission just to see him again.
I don't understand.
He said he'd been trying to stop what shouldn't have started, that Kepler should never return, and that none of them should have come back. She pulled away and stormed out, ignoring him as he called after her. Outside, Blake and Gibson stood facing the Henderson hub. He explained what it was. A failed attempt to destroy it had been stopped. Now, Blake declared her intention to use it to transmit a signal.
It looks like my TSH levels have recovered.
Gibson, encouraged, said they'd retrieve the biometer. Later, the four of them, Blake, Gibson, Mune, and Neil, gathered around a dinner table. As they raised their drinks, Blake and Gibson toasted with the familiar phrase, "for the many." The conversation shifted to the language spoken by the Muds. Gibson joked they had 13 words for water. Neil corrected him, it was 14. Gibson teased that Neil should become a translator. The boy disagreed. He wanted to be an astronaut and save lives. Gibson chuckled, saying that was superhero work. He nudged Mune to share how their lives had changed.
Nalsnora.
Umbilical cord.
Mune began recounting their story. When she delivered Neil, his umbilical cord was wrapped around his neck. They were out in the ocean with no one beside her. If it wasn't for Gibson, they would have died. He delivered the baby and treated her wounds.
Borg. Just a civilized human being, for God's sake.
Just then, a new dish, a fishball, was served. Neil reached for it with his hands. Gibson snapped at him, demanding he use a fork like a civilized person. Moments later, the lights shut off. Gibson calmly said it was only a blackout.
Secure this floor. Have all guards check every entrance.
Shortly after Paling appeared with urgent news, someone had sabotaged the generators and taken out the guards. The biometer was missing. Alarmed, Gibson ordered guards at every exit. He told Neil to stay with Munai and lock their door. When Blake offered to help, he told her to stay in her room and left, armed.
That's an order.
Back in her quarters, Blake was surprised when Narvik appeared, grabbing her. She demanded to know where Mela was. Blake led her to the children's room. With the light now in Narvik's hand, she called out for her daughter. Mela stirred at her voice. Before they could reunite, Paling and another guard arrived. They attacked Narvik. Blake tried to intervene, but both were overpowered. As Narvik was dragged away, she whispered a chilling truth to Blake. They only take the girls. Later, Mune tended to Blake's wounds. When Blake asked what would happen to Narvik, Mune simply said it was better not to talk about it. Gibson entered and apologized for dragging her into the mess. Blake reminded him that Narvik only wanted her child back. He looked at her and said she was now Kepler's daughter.
Maybe late, mid-40s?
Still shaken, Blake asked the real reason behind taking girls. Gibson explained, the average woman back on Kepler was nearing 50. If they waited any longer, it'd be too late. If Earth's conditions could restore fertility, they'd need younger, genetically varied women. That was the real mission, ensuring survival.
We can repopulate our planet.
As they talk, Paling arrives, holding what is supposed to be the biometer case. He said it had been found on the tugboat. Gibson praised Paling for doing what was best for himself, but when they opened the case, it was empty. Neil comes calling for Gibson, but he scolds him.
Daddy!
Shut up!
Frustrated, Gibson demanded to know where the device had gone. He told Blake to go retrieve it with Paling. When she asked about Narvik, Gibson said she'd be executed at dawn, and then asked if Blake was still on their side. She nodded. As she left, he ordered Paling to watch her closely. He then turned to Neil, who'd been quietly holding Mayla's doll. He noticed something glowing.
What's that?
Alone in her room, Blake heard a noise. She opened a small compartment. Mayla was hiding there, visibly shaken. Blake embraced her and promised to find her mother. A knock interrupted them. Paling was at the door, asking to come in. Blake hid Myla in the compartment and went to open the door. When she let Paling in, he claimed a girl had gone missing and he needed to search the room. He glanced around and found nothing. Sitting on the bed, he turned to Blake, asking what Kepler looked like. Then his tone shifted and he asked her to join him in bed. Without waiting for consent, he leaned in, attempting to force himself on her. As Paling leaned in, a soft sound from behind the wall gave away Myla's hiding spot. He turned, ready to investigate. Before he could open the door, Blake kissed him to distract him, then quietly slipped poison into his mouth. Within moments, he collapsed and died. Blake gathered Mayla and took the gun. They moved through the halls, bypassing a guard, and reaching the holding cell where Narvik was imprisoned. The door opened. Mother and daughter reunited. With Narvik armed, the other captives, mostly women and children, were freed. They found their daughters, took what they could carry, and escaped the building. Blake made her way to her father. From the window, he pointed out a departing ship. One Gibson never leaves the ship.
It's Neil. He sends me surprises.
As Blake turned, she noticed Mayla's doll nearby and questioned how it had ended up there. Her father explained that Neil had sent it as a gift. That detail revealed the truth. The biometer had been hidden inside the doll. Blake tried to explain that the mission had been based on a lie, but her father revealed a deeper truth. The real proof had existed all along. Neil is a Kepler.
Neil is a Kepler. Whatever Gibson told you, it's a lie.
Her father urged her to stop Gibson. She hugs him, and after a quiet moment, she walks to the door to go out. Before leaving, her father called her by name and admitted he had never lit the final match. She smiled faintly and walked away, believing they'd cross paths again. Outside, chaos erupted. The Muds fled the compound as gunfire rained down. Blake defended them, providing cover as families rushed to the boat. Once the group was safe aboard, she turned toward the transmitter ship. Inside, Gibson had already begun the transmission. Moone and Neil were with him. He threatened Neil to gain control of the situation and silenced Moone when she tried to intervene. Neil cried over Moone's body while Blake stood helpless. She dropped her weapon. Gibson declared the signal had been sent. Blake attacked, grabbing him by the neck. They both plunged into the water. She held him beneath the surface, refusing to let him escape. He drowned. Blake was pulled from the water by the Muds. Narvik revived her. Relief swept over the group when she started to gasp. As the boat moved forward, Blake spotted her father sitting quietly. He reminded her of the trust Neil had placed in her. She approached the boy and gave him the match holder, a token from their father. She told him it now belonged to him and that it must be guarded carefully. The name he carried was likely given for a reason. Neil asked questions about Kepler. Blake offered answers. Mila and Narvik joined them. The boat pushed onward. After some time, the Mud Children, still hidden after the Kepler raid, watched as shapes moved toward them. It was their kidnapped parents returning safely. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our recap. Like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.